I am Victor Edward Swanson, and I am the publisher and author for the Hologlobe Press. Also, I am a historian, specializing in a number of subjects, especially television history, and for example, I am the best historian related to Detroit television in the country. Here, I am presenting a history story about a model of 40 Mile Point Lighthouse that I made, based on my knowledge of the real lighthouse of the Rogers City area of Michigan, such as the knowledge that I learned by reading the journals and logs for the lighthouse from 1897 to 1968. This presentation contains photographs of the model while it was being made and contains my narration. In 1896, a lighthouse began to be built along Lake Huron, about 7 miles north of Rogers City, Michigan, in the United States of America. And really, the lighthouse was more than a lighthouse. What was built was really the 40 Mile Point Light Station, which had a lighthouse, a fog signal building, an oil house, a privy, a barn, a boathouse, and a few other things. On April 30th, 1897, the light station went into full operation, being manned by a lighthouse keeper and an assistant lighthouse keeper, and the lighthouse would be manned in some way till the end of the 1968 shipping season. And for the 1969 shipping season, the lighthouse would become a working non-manned light on the Great Lakes as it is today. Originally, the lighthouse proper was a 2-story brick building, and the tower was unpainted. You are seeing some early photographs of the lighthouse while this introduction is presented. In 1914, a portion of the lighthouse was painted white. And in 1935, most of the tower was made white. And in 1949, dormers were added to the lighthouse. And today, the lighthouse is about as it was starting in 1949. In 2017, I began to make a model of the lighthouse. And it was made to show the lighthouse from 1914 to 1919, a period for which there are no known photographs today. To make the lighthouse, I examined the few original drawings of the lighthouse that exist, collected and examined photographs of the lighthouse, measured the lighthouse, studied the structure of the lighthouse, and made drawings that could be used to make the model. The model was made over a period of several years because I often was not at the main construction location, because I lived in 2 places in Michigan, and because COVID-19 was blocking travel. Incidentally, it was in 2020, when COVID-19 was a big deal, when I did research that led me into finding, it seems, where the first Fresnel lens for the real lighthouse is. And at the time this production was made, that lens was at the Maine Lighthouse Museum in the United States of America. On September 23, 2020, I took several photographs of the real 40 Mile Point Lighthouse, and here is one of the photographs. Generally speaking, you are seeing what the real lighthouse has looked like since 1949, when the dormers were added, and the dormers are related to bathrooms on the 2nd floor, one for each residence. The look of the tower, as shown, was created in 1935. What is shown in this first photograph really related to the model are 4 main things. I go from left to right. There is a shaping tool, the use of which I will not describe. In the middle of the photograph is a jig to make the roof of the lantern room. Next is a practice piece showing how I might make the windows. The final object is another test case for the window format. The first real photograph of the model of the lighthouse is now before you, and it was taken on September 2nd, 2017. On top of the rough structure is the lantern room, which is made of brass sheet, the pieces of which are soldered together. What you cannot see is how I made, within the lantern room, slots into which little pieces of plexiglass can be pushed in to have windows. The walls of the model are made of AZEK trim board. The pieces have yet to be trimmed off at the bottoms to result in the proper heights for the boards. The lighthouse is resting on the base, which is a piece of foundation grade plywood, which will get covered by a sheet of aluminum. In this photograph of September 17, 2017, the walls are now trimmed down. There is a rough piece of AZEK trim board used as the deck of the lantern room. On the wall system, I have drawn in the placement locations of the windows, headers, sills, doors, and the two vents for the furnaces. If you look closely, you will see the real supervisor of the project, Bob the Builder. To dig out the window slots and such, I used chisels and an X-Acto knife. One chisel was ground down so that I could make 1/8 inch cuts. By the way, up to this point in the history of construction, which was September 19, 2017, the model was being put together at a place that was not the main residence because it was where I had the table saw. In this photograph of October 15, 2017, the rough structures for the windows have been made and put in place temporarily. The pieces, which are made of aluminum that is painted brown, are in essence rectangular pieces that have sides folded in. The pieces are simply pressed into the slots, and the windows then stay in place. The headers and sills have been put in place for October 31st, 2017, and the pieces are made of gray-like AZEK type board. Also, the windows have been drilled out and filed out. To complete the windows, I have rectangular plexiglass pieces, and one piece of plexiglass is behind each window frame. Much work has been done since the windows were drilled out and filed out. Here I have the first version of the roof, which is made of pieces of cardboard box. The first version is used to see, on this date of November 15th, 2017, how things are lining up, and I'm working on the process to make templates for the final pieces for the roof. Also, the lighthouse now has a brass sheet for the lantern room floor and has a rail system, which is like the rail system on the real lighthouse. This photograph of January 26, 2018 shows the lighthouse on the concrete driveway at the main residence, where most of the work on the lighthouse was done. The lighthouse has a second test structure for the roof. 3 chimneys are now shown, and each is held in place by a brass screw. The foundation-grade plywood base is covered with aluminum sheet, and there are feet attached to the base. If you look closely, you will see an overhang over each door. On the back side of the lantern room is a smokestack, which, in relation to the real lighthouse years ago, is for a heating stove that was in the room below the lantern room, and the lower room is called the watch room. This photograph gives you a view down into the model of the lighthouse. In the bottom of the lighthouse is an electronics board, which will be used to make the light of the lighthouse flash. The board is held in with 4 big stainless steel bolts, and the board comes out from below. Around the tops of the walls are pieces of angled aluminum, which have yet to be adjusted properly, and they will be used to attach and hold down the roof pieces, which will be pieces of brass sheet. The ridge beams are made of brass, and they are soldered together, and the ridge beam system is held in with screws at the ends, which cannot be seen because they are blocked from your view. Notice the screws holding in the chimneys. This photograph shows some of the various tools or jigs that are used to make the parts for the lighthouse, such as the ridge beam system. This photograph of January 26, 2018 shows the first version of the electronics board. In essence, this photograph is sort of an aside. It shows the electronics board on February 27, 2020, and the board has been slightly changed from the version of 2018. I have made the board so that now a switch to turn on and off the light in the lighthouse can exist, such as on a cable system some feet away from the lighthouse, such as when it is displayed in a plexiglass case. The third version of the roof is shown in this photograph of January 28, 2018. The pieces for the roof are aluminum, and they are the first real templates for the roof pieces. The final pieces for the roof are going to be brass, so that I can solder pieces together and solder shafts of brass bolts to the undersides of the roof pieces. And the brass bolts will sort of be perpendicular to the sheets, and brass nuts will be used to hold the roof pieces to the aluminum angle pieces at the tops of the walls. This version of the lighthouse for March 2nd, 2018 has the first version of the sidewalks, and later the design will be thrown out. The chimneys have chimney caps, which will later be glued in place with rubber cement. I will not use permanent glue because the caps have to come off easily in the future if I wish to make changes to the lighthouse. I note here that the lighthouse is being made to be repairable and to be taken apart if necessary. The rough versions of the final roof pieces are in place, and you can see red strips on the walls of the model, and those represent a layer of darker red brick on the real lighthouse. Here is what the back of the model of the lighthouse looks like on March 4th, 2018. There are 2 cellars. Next to each cellar is a square unit. For years, people of the 40 Mile Point Lighthouse Society thought the units were related to coal chutes. Through research, I found that they were vent locations. When open, they allowed fresh air to pass from the outside of the lighthouse to the rooms, by way of the furnaces, but the fresh air, of course, did not make contact with or pass through the burner sections of the furnaces. I discovered that originally the lighthouse had 2 Carton brand hard coal furnaces, one for each side of the lighthouse. Under each side of the base is a piece of metal angle iron, to which 2 metal nuts are attached, which involved welding. The 2 nuts on each side are associated with 2 stainless steel bolts that hold the handles in place so that the model can be moved easily. The handles are taken off so that the model can be displayed. Notice how the handles are angled, and it allows the center of gravity of the model to be below the handles, and that makes it easier to move the model. This photograph of July 25th, 2018 shows the model with a slight change. The roof now has what are called Yankee gutters. No photographs exist to show exactly how the original Yankee gutters were made. I only give an impression of Yankee gutters. By the way, this photograph shows the skylights for the first time, and the skylights exist on the lighthouse to help light the stairways between the first floor and the second floor of each residence. This close-up shot shows one of the Yankee gutters and shows the air vents, one of which has no cover and has screen material. Notice how bolts come down from the roof and go through the angled pieces at the roof in this photograph of May 4th, 2019, and see how the nuts fit on the bolts. Also notice at the left somewhat how the ridge is held in place, and if you look closely you can see hints of how the walls are held in place. And the walls are held in place with angled aluminum strips and stainless steel screws. In this photograph, there is green paint on the eaves parts now. Here is a photograph taken on May 16, 2019, and it shows the first red paint on the lighthouse, and the red paint is based on a piece of brick that was found one day on the real lighthouse property, and the photograph gives another look at how the walls are held in place. This photograph of May 16, 2019 shows another view of how the walls are held in place. At first, I thought about making the sidewalks by painting them on the base, but I gave up on that idea quickly, and this photograph of May 18, 2019 shows what the sidewalks might have looked like if they would have been painted on. The first real concrete sidewalks at the lighthouse were installed in 1908, and only pieces of those sidewalks remain today. Some more sidewalks were added to the real lighthouse property in 1911 when 2 brick privies were set up in the backyard of the lighthouse. Here the roof of the lighthouse is painted for the first time, and the color of paint is based on a real paint color of roofs of lighthouses in the late 1800s. To paint the roof, I used techniques that I had learned by painting cars over the years. I used auto body filler and spot putty to help hide the seams, and I did a bit of wet sanding. This photograph is dated July 1st, 2019. The windows, which are painted green and are historically correct in relation to color, are in place for the final time here on September 17, 2019. Notice the shades and curtains, and notice how the location of the sidewalks are drawn in, and the format for the sidewalks is the format used for the real sidewalks of 1908. The paint on the base is designed to be colored sort of like the sand around the real lighthouse today, and it has the purpose of covering up the white of the aluminum base, and the paint will be later covered by static grass. For fun one day, September 17, 2019, I placed the model of the lighthouse on the trunk of a car and took a photograph of the model with a tree in the background so that I could see what it would look like. The base now has a border in this photograph of September 19, 2019. The brass corners exist as blockers which protect the border. The border is painted the same color as that of the roof. A 1913 photograph of the backside of the lighthouse exists today, and this photograph of the model from September 24, 2019 has been taken from about the same angle as the photograph of 1913. In the 1913 photograph, there is a bush in the foreground, which can be considered at the southwest corner of the lighthouse, so there is one in the photograph of the model. I have a bush in the southeast corner of the model, though there is no proof one ever existed there in 1913. Remember, the model covers the period from 1914 to 1919. In the 1913 photograph of the backside of the lighthouse, a person can see a wheelbarrow. Here in the photograph of October 19, 2019, is a wheelbarrow based on the one in the 1913 photograph. The wheelbarrow is made of brass, and it has yet to be painted. The lantern room is now shown painted white for the first time on October 24, 2019. The real lantern room was made white in 1914, when two parts of the tower were made white. Incidentally, the wheelbarrow, which is in the lower left side of the photograph, is now painted with a gray primer. To give an impression of grass, not great grass, given the soil was mostly sand for the real lighthouse, I put down what is called in the model industry static grass. It is the type of fake grass that people who have model train systems use. Notice the border for the base is not shown in this photograph of February 1, 2020. I made the border in such a way that it can be removed easily. This photograph of February 1, 2020 shows the backside of the house. The cellar doors now have hinges and handles, though only in the form of paint. Those two screws are simply to block stuff from getting in the holes for the bushes while the model is being worked on. In the few photographs of the early years for the real lighthouse that exist, I can only see plants on the east side of the lighthouse, so I have only plants on the east side of the model. The blocks for sidewalks that are showing are made of cut aluminum sheet. By the way, most of the original sidewalk blocks were 4 feet long. In April 1897, the lighthouse went into operation, and in the Sears and Roebuck catalog for 1897, there was a settee for sale. The settee, the bench-like thing that you can see in the photograph of February 2, 2020, is based on the settee in the Sears and Roebuck catalog. The settee is made of brass, and it folds up like the real settee. The model is done. Here is the first of 8 photographs that were taken on the afternoon of November 4, 2020. And the photographs were taken on beach of Lake Huron, a spot that was about 20 miles north of Rogers City, Michigan. The base of the entire model is 17 inches across and 15 inches wide or deep. The model of the lighthouse is 16 inches high to the tip of the flagpole. This view shows the northwest area, or the northwest corner of the lighthouse. For this afternoon shoot, I have a ladder leaning against the wall in the northeast area of the lighthouse. The ladder is based on a ladder shown in a photograph of the real lighthouse that was taken sometime between 1908 to 1911. The man who is shown in this photograph is one of 6 that I have. The man is actually a railroad man, but I painted the cap dark blue to make the man look like what a lighthouse keeper looked like in work clothes. The man is an O-scale figure because the model of the lighthouse is set at 1/4 inch to 1 foot reel. This photograph shows the east side of the lighthouse, and in the photograph you can see from left to right, a wheelbarrow, a bush, flowers, a ladder, a settee, a broom, and a guy. Here is the back side of the lighthouse, and from left to right you can see a bucket, a wash tub with a scrub board, a man, 2 barrels, a shovel, a bucket, and a wheelbarrow. This photograph shows the southwest area of the lighthouse, and I note here that you will see no long downspouts on the lighthouse, since there were none on the real lighthouse in the early years, when there were only very short pieces of downspout up at the gutter areas. This photograph has been taken with a flash so that the contrast between light and shade could be softened, and in the background is Lake Huron. And here is a better photograph of the supervisor of the building project, Bob the Builder. Bob wants you to know that such things as shovels and axes and buckets and barrels were not made by me. Such items were bought at P&D Hobby Shop of Fraser, Michigan. On November 4, 2020, I took the model of the lighthouse to 40 Mile Point Lighthouse Park, as it is known today, and I took 178 photographs, adding to my collection of 162 afternoon photographs. This photograph is the first of 4 that I now present from the evening photo session. In the background, of course, is the real 40 Mile Point Lighthouse. I guess I can say that you are looking at 2 pretty buildings. This photograph has been taken with the flash feature of the camera set to on, and that is why the lighthouse looks a little washed out. And in the background is Lake Huron, and way out in the distance is Canada. Here is a photograph of the lantern room, and it is the backside of the lantern room. You can see the flagpole well. It was in 1913 when a real flagpole was set up on the lantern room deck of the real lighthouse, and it was when there was already a flagpole on the grounds of the lighthouse property. By the way, in the early days of the real lighthouse, the property of the lighthouse was called the reservation. Here is a photograph of November 4, 2020, and it shows both lighthouses, and the photograph had to be taken so that the model was lighted. As you can see, both lighthouses are giving off a flash. Originally, the flash format, also known as the characteristic of the real lighthouse, was set at about 2 seconds on and 8 seconds off, and that is what the model is set at. I do have to report that my model has a flashing light bulb, and that the real lighthouse in the early days had a rotating Fresnel lens, which offered up in relation to where a person was standing moments of light and moments of no light, and the light source, a flame, was always on. It was in the basement of the Maine residence where I lived where most of the work on the model was done. And here's a photograph of the general work area. Incidentally, to make the model, I had to use such tools as a table saw, an oxyacetylene torch, a bandsaw, a drill press, 2 different scroll saws, a Dremel tool, a propane torch, a solder iron, a clothes iron, a sewing machine, and a drill. And here is the workbench, which I had made some 10 years previously to making the model. It is loaded with stuff, such as containers for another project, This final photograph shows the model of 40 Mile Point Lighthouse on December 25, 2020, when it was placed within a plexiglass dust case for display. And by the way, the dust case can be taken down within a minute. This model was made by Victor Edward Swanson in Michigan of the United States of America for Joan Marie Scheel from July 2017 to November 2020. And it shows the real lighthouse as it was from June 1914 to May 1919, but it can be said that the model represents the real lighthouse from 1919 to 1935 if the color of the inside of the lantern room is not considered. This presentation is a companion piece to a text document that I have that is called The History of Making a Model of 40 Mile Point Lighthouse as it was from June 1914 to May 1919, which is 29 pages long and was completed in May 2021.